The crowd
Can you see the
gasped as
problem?
Eliza Chen,
It's the battery, I
global
think.
CEO
Are
of
we
Horizon
stuck?
Technology,
No, we'll figure it out.
grabbed the microphone at the charity gala. Her voice trembled slightly, a stark contrast to her usual boardroom confidence. "Jake Williams," she said, her eyes scanning the shocked faces until they locked with his, "I don't have a husband, or anyone waiting at home. I'm tired of pretending I don't feel what I feel. Would you, a man who has turned down my meeting requests 3 times this month, please give me just one date? Tonight?" The room fell silent as the single father of 2 stood frozen, the weight of 200 stares pressing upon him. If you've ever wondered what happens when someone risks everything for a chance at love, stay with me until the end. And if you're enjoying this emotional journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that remind us all what it means to be vulnerable and brave. 3 months earlier, Eliza Chen had everything a person could want, except someone to share it with. At 41, she had built Horizon Technologies from a small startup to a Fortune 500 company. Her sleek corner office overlooked the city skyline, a daily reminder of how far she had climbed. Yet each evening, she returned to an empty penthouse apartment where the silence was so complete she could hear the hum of the refrigerator from every room. Jake Williams never planned on being a single father. At 38, his life revolved around his 2 children, Emma, age 10, and Lucas, age 7. After his wife Lisa's death from cancer 3 years ago, he'd rebuilt his life around school pickups, soccer practices, and maintaining his modest landscaping business. Dating wasn't even on his radar. His modest home in the suburbs was always chaotic, filled with children's laughter, homework struggles, and the constant juggling act that defined his existence. Their worlds collided on a rainy Tuesday when Eliza's car broke down outside the elementary school where Jake was picking up his children. He'd noticed her expensive suit and designer shoes immediately, so out of place in the carpool lane, but it was the look of absolute helplessness on her face that made him offer assistance. "Car trouble?" he'd asked, umbrella in hand, rain dripping down his collar. "I'm supposed to speak to my niece's class in 10 minutes, she'd replied, frantically typing on her phone. "And apparently, even with all this technology, I can't conjure a mechanic out of thin air." Jake had smiled, the kind of warm, genuine smile Eliza rarely encountered in her corporate world. "I can take a look. I'm no mechanic, but I know the basics." 20 minutes later, he'd identified the problem, called a friend who owned a repair shop, and arranged for her car to be towed and fixed by the next day. When she insisted on paying him, he'd simply shaken his head. "Pay it forward someday," he'd said before loading his curious children into his weathered SUV. Eliza had watched them drive away, strangely moved by the simple interaction. The next day, she'd sent an extravagant gift basket to his business address with a thank you note. Jake had called to thank her but politely requested no more gifts. It was nothing, really, he'd insisted. But to Eliza, who'd built her life in a world where every action expected equal or greater return, his kindness without expectation was anything but nothing. Over the following weeks, Eliza found herself thinking about Jake at odd moments. During board meetings, while reviewing quarterly projections, even during her morning run. She'd never experienced this kind of persistent distraction. When her niece mentioned that Emma Williams was in her class, Eliza had casually inquired about the family. "Emma's dad makes the best Halloween costumes," her niece had volunteered. "Last year he built her a dragon that actually breathed smoke. But she says he works all the time since her mom died." The information had settled in Eliza's chest like a weight. She began orchestrating accidental meetings, visiting her niece's school events, frequenting the coffee shop near Jake's landscaping business, even considering a home renovation that would require landscaping consultation. Her assistant had watched these machinations with increasing concern. "You know," May had finally said one afternoon, "most people just ask someone out for coffee." But Eliza Chen hadn't built an empire by being like most people. She'd strategized and planned and outmaneuvered her way to success. She'd never failed at acquiring any asset she'd targeted. And yet, After 3 chance encounters where Jake had been unfailingly kind but entirely unaware of her interest, she realized she was approaching this all wrong. Jake's life had settled into a functional routine after Lisa died. Mornings were a carefully orchestrated dance of breakfast preparation, lunch packing, and hunting for perpetually missing shoes. His landscaping business had just enough clients to provide for his family while allowing him flexibility for school events and sick days. He had friends, mostly other parents and a few remaining couples who hadn't drifted away after Lisa's death, but his romantic life was non-existent. "Daddy, why don't you ever go on dates?" Emma had asked one night while he braided her hair before bed. The question had caught him off guard, his fingers fumbling with the strands. "I'm pretty busy with you monsters," he'd replied lightly. "Besides, who would make your disgusting peanut butter and pickle sandwiches if I was out dating?" "Ms. Rodriguez says her mom uses an app to find dates," Emma had continued, unperturbed. "You just swipe if you think someone's cute." "Is that so?" Jake had said, finishing the braid. "Well, I think I'll stick to the old-fashioned way of meeting people for now." The truth was more complicated. The thought of dating terrified him. Not just the mechanics of it, the apps and the texting and the awkward first-date conversations, but the emotional risk. He'd loved Lisa completely, had built a life and family with her, and then watched helplessly as cancer took her piece by piece. The idea of opening himself to that kind of potential loss again seemed impossible. So when the elegant woman whose car he'd helped fix kept appearing in his orbit, Jake noticed but didn't consider her appearances significant. She was clearly successful and sophisticated, so far removed from his world of grass stains and macaroni dinners that the possibility of her interest never crossed his mind. He'd turned down her meeting requests, ostensibly about landscaping her company's headquarters, because he suspected it was charity work offered out of gratitude, and his pride couldn't accept that. Then came the charity gala for the Children's Cancer Foundation. Jake attended every year, a small tribute to Lisa and the organization that had supported them through her illness. He usually volunteered, helping with setup or running the silent auction. He never expected to find himself the center of attention, staring at one of the most powerful women in the city as she publicly declared her interest in him. As Jake stood frozen amid the sea of surprised faces, his mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. He was wearing his only suit, 5 years old and slightly too tight across the shoulders. His babysitter was only available until 11. He hadn't been on a date since before Emma was born. And this accomplished, beautiful woman had just laid her pride at his feet in front of the entire room. He started, then stopped, overwhelmed. The silence stretched painfully. Then, from somewhere behind him, he heard a familiar voice. "Say yes, Daddy." Emma called out, giggling from where she stood with the other junior volunteers. The tension broke as laughter rippled through the crowd. Jake's face flushed, but he found himself smiling. "Well," he said, meeting Eliza's anxious gaze, "I suppose I can't say no now without looking like the biggest jerk in the city." Eliza's relief was visible, her professional composure cracking to reveal genuine vulnerability. "Is that a yes?" she pressed, microphone still in hand. Jake nodded, his smile widening. "That's a yes." What followed became the talk of the city for weeks. The unlikely pair left the gala together, Eliza Chen in her couture gown and Jake Williams in his slightly outdated suit. They ended up at an all-night diner because, as Jake explained, "I promised the sitter I'd be home by 11, and honestly, I can't afford another hour." Under the fluorescent lights, over plates of greasy fries and coffee, they had their first real conversation. Eliza explained her orchestrated meetings and her frustration when he kept declining her invitations. Jake admitted he'd been oblivious to her interest, convinced someone of her status couldn't possibly see anything in a struggling landscaper with 2 kids and a mortgage. "Why me?" he asked finally, genuinely puzzled. "You could have anyone." Eliza considered this, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I've spent my entire adult life surrounded by people who want something from me, my influence, my connections, my money. You helped me without wanting anything in return. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Jake shrugged. That's just being a decent human being. Exactly, she said softly. And that's apparently what I've been looking for. Their first date extended well past midnight, despite Jake's babysitter constraints. They talked about everything: his late wife, her workaholic tendencies, his children's personalities, her lonely achievements. By the time he dropped her off at her building, something significant had shifted in both their worlds. The following months weren't easy. Their lives existed in parallel universes that proved challenging to merge. Eliza's schedule of international flights and evening networking events clashed with Jake's strict routine of school pickups and bedtime stories. Her corporate associates raised eyebrows at her new companion, while some of the other parents at Emma and Lucas's school made cutting remarks about Jake trading up. Their first major fight came when Eliza, trying to be helpful, hired a landscaping crew to completely renovate Jake's modest backyard as a surprise while he was taking the kids to visit his parents. "You can't just swoop in and change things without asking," he'd said, his voice tight with anger as he surveyed the transformed yard. "This isn't a business acquisition where you can just take control." "I was trying to help," Eliza had retorted, frustrated by his reaction. "You mentioned wanting to fix it up for years but never having the time." "Because I need to prioritize other things, like saving for my kids' college funds," Jake had shot back. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity when it's done out of love," Eliza had said, the word slipping out before she could catch it. They'd both fallen silent, the declaration hanging between them. It was the first time either had used that word, though they'd been dating for nearly 2 months. "I need to do things my way, in my time," Jake had finally said, his voice softer. "I'm not used to someone else making decisions that affect my family." Eliza had nodded, realizing her mistake. "And I'm used to solving problems with resources. I need to remember that not everything needs fixing." That night had marked a turning point. They began to find middle ground, Eliza learning to slow down and appreciate Jake's simpler approach to life, while Jake gradually allowed himself to accept help without seeing it as charity. The children, initially wary of this elegant stranger in their lives, slowly warmed to Eliza as she made genuine efforts to connect on their terms. She attended soccer games without checking her phone, learned to make pancakes in animal shapes, with mixed success, and never tried to replace their memories of their mother. For Eliza, the chaos of family life was both overwhelming and intoxicating. After years of perfectly scheduled days, there was something liberating about spilled juice and impromptu dance parties in the living room. She found herself leaving work earlier, delegating more tasks, and reconsidering what success really meant. 6 months after their first date, Jake invited Eliza to his home for a special dinner. The kids were suspiciously well-behaved, the house unusually tidy. After they'd eaten, Emma and Lucas presented her with a clumsily wrapped package. "We made it in art class," Lucas explained as she carefully opened it. Inside was a framed photograph of Jake and the children, but with an empty space beside them that had been outlined with glitter and labeled Eliza in Emma's careful handwriting. "Dad says you don't have to move in yet," Emma explained matter-of-factly. "But we wanted you to know there's space when you're ready." Eliza, who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, found herself speechless, tears filling her eyes. Jake watched nervously from across the table. "Is it too much?" he asked quietly after sending the children to get dessert from the kitchen. "I told them we should give you time, but they're excited and I couldn't." Eliza reached for his hand, cutting him off. "It's perfect," she said simply. "I've spent my whole life creating space for accomplishments, never for people. It means everything to know you've created space for me." 2 weeks later, a video went viral on social media. It showed Eliza Chen at the same annual charity gala where she'd first asked Jake out, once again taking the microphone. This time, Jake stood beside her, looking considerably more comfortable in a new suit. "A year ago, I stood here and did the scariest thing I've ever done," she began. "Scarier than starting my company," scarier than taking it public. I asked a kind man for just one date. She smiled at Jake. Tonight, I'm doing something even scarier. I'm asking him for forever. The crowd erupted as she dropped to one knee and opened a small box. Jake's expression of shock was captured perfectly as Emma and Lucas rushed onto the stage, both wearing t-shirts that read, "Say Yes." And he did. Their wedding 6 months later wasn't the lavish affair everyone expected from someone of Eliza's stature. Instead, they held it in Jake's backyard, the same one she'd renovated without permission, now transformed by Jake's own landscaping company into a botanical wonderland. Emma served as flower girl, Lucas as ring bearer, and Eliza's niece as junior bridesmaid. The guest list included both corporate executives and the entire third-grade class. 5 years later, Eliza Chen Williams still runs Horizon Technologies, though now with more reasonable hours and a home office for emergencies. Jake's landscaping business has expanded, specializing in sustainable urban gardens for schools and community centers. They've added another child to their family, a 3-year-old daughter who has Eliza's determination and Jake's easy smile. Their story has become something of a modern fairy tale in the city, though they both insist their life together isn't perfect. They still argue about schedules and priorities. Jake still sometimes feels overwhelmed by Eliza's world, and she occasionally gets impatient with the slower pace of family life. But each night, they return to a home filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a blended family. The lesson they share with anyone who asks is simple: sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for what you want, even when it seems impossible. Sometimes love requires a public declaration and a willingness to look foolish. And sometimes, the most unlikely combinations create the strongest bonds. If you've stayed with me until this point, perhaps you've recognized your own fears of vulnerability in this story, or maybe you're contemplating taking a risk for something, or someone, you truly want. Remember that the most meaningful connections often begin with the courage to step outside our comfort zones, to bridge different worlds, and to see the value in perspectives unlike our own. Life's greatest gifts rarely arrive in expected packages. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more narratives that explore the complexity and beauty of modern relationships. Remember, sometimes the love story you never expected is exactly the one you need.